the Cybersecurity and Compliance Podcast with Craig Petronella. Learn about the most current IT security threats in ransomware, phishing, business email compromise, cybercrime tactics, cyber heist schemes, social engineering scams, as well as hints and tips from leading professionals to help you prevent hackers from penetrating your network and dropping ransomware or malware payloads. This podcast will arm you with the best info to defend your network against the latest cyber crimes. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And now, here's your host, Craig Petronella.
Welcome to today's PTG podcast, where we are discussing Biden's dire warning that Russian cyber attacks are coming. Biden said last night that with Putin's back against the wall, there's a greater chance that he may employ additional tactics and increase the severity of the tactics. And one of the tools that he's most likely to use, in our view, is cyber warfare. So maybe we can talk on that a little bit.
Sure. Yeah, we've been talking about that for, 3 weeks now?
Yeah.
So it was just like speculation around increase your defenses, make sure you have capability to detect and defend your business against a cyber attack. And also at the consumer level too, make sure that you're being cautious on emails and don't open any suspicious emails or click on links or attachments. And if you get random people calling you, don't be quick to answer the phone. Try to avoid the robocalls. We had previous episodes where we put out some tips on how to best secure your mobile device. And so definitely check back on our YouTube channel and other sources there to brush up if you need to. But yeah, the writing's on the wall, right? It's definitely not going to go away anytime soon. Sadly, I think this is the new norm. And I think that I've said this before too, firewalls and antivirus are no longer enough. So you have to have technology like XDR and some of these other layers, obviously training and doing the risk assessments and pen tests and all that fun stuff that, quite frankly, a lot of companies, they don't have the budget to do it. So they pretty much do nothing. So I think now's the time to really change that and go through a proof of concept and really explore and look through a lens that you've never looked through before to see all the things that are really happening on your networks without your knowledge that you thought were getting trapped, but are not.
Yeah. I think too, another thing that's really important that a lot of people miss, I don't know, back like in 2014, I got hacked on my social media, on my Facebook, and they took over my chat and sent out some pretty inappropriate messages to like my cousins and stuff. So that was fun. So that's another thing. I'm not really sure how they were able to get it. I probably reused a password or something because that was before I really knew any better. That's another thing too, is that they'll also contact you in social media. They'll clone different profiles and pretend to be somebody and send out messages.
Yep. Uh-oh. Erin, you froze. I don't know if you can. Oh, there you're back.
Yeah. Hey, sorry about that. I guess my internet's not the greatest. Shocker. But yeah, so just be careful on social media too. Be careful with your emails. Be careful with your phone calls. Because I think, didn't we read too recently that SMS smishing is also on the
rise? Yep, yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, smishing, if you don't know what that term means, is it's like phishing to your email, but it's to your phone through a message. And the problem with smishing is that you can't hover over the link to see where it goes. So definitely do not click on any links in text for sure to keep yourself safe. Like I said, we posted a bunch of other tips there to secure your mobile devices and take those security control precautions seriously. Definitely now with the threat landscape elevated.
Yeah, definitely.
Hey, Blake.
Oh, you're muted, Blake. I don't know if you knew that or not.
There we go.
Yeah. I was just letting you guys talk. So
hey, it's good to see some different faces.
That's right.
Look at my face. It's stuck. Real nice one.
It's interesting to look at the quadrant of our pictures because you have Craig that's like, he's the glowing face of PTG, always got his is really good visuals there. And then Erin and Blake have the blurred background, and then mine is just the background. I don't know, that picture just popped up on my thing. But anyway, it's interesting because I just think it's a neat combination there.
It's funny because with my big fluffy hair, the background doesn't always do the best. So that's why I think blur is probably better.
Yeah.
Change it.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
Blake's in space now.
I'm up here with you, BJ.
Yeah.
Blake's keeping the International Space Station secure.
Hey, right.
Guarding us from the solar flares.
Yeah.
That could be possible.
Yeah. So, Craig, what was the other? You posted something about what was it? It was something regarding passwords, wasn't it?
I posted something. Oh, this one's funny. I don't know if I posted this, but I read it. So somebody used the super secure password of password. Wow,
Oh, wow.
Genius idea. And then they got extorted for $15 million
Oh,
in
whoa.
ransomware fees.
Wow.
Because guess what? It wasn't just on their email account. It was on a server at a company.
Oh,
Are you
wow.
serious?
Oh,
Wow,
yeah.
That's bad.
Yeah. Obviously, if you're listening, don't use the password. Take our tip seriously and secure your passwords with multi-factor and obviously complex long string passwords. Use a password manager.
It's so easy if, for example, somebody at their home network, most of the time, whenever you put a router or Wi-Fi network in, usually the access is 192.168.1 like 9 out of 10 times. And then it'll pop up for a login, and then it'll be like admin password. And the username is admin, the password's password.
Or it's just admin.
Or it's blank for some reason. And most people so anybody on your home network, if it's a friend or family, can easily get in there. And yeah, I mean, I definitely recommend change that. It's silly things like that people just don't know.
Yeah. These default configurations are just weak and insecure. And in the manuals, they always say, make sure you change this, but nobody reads the manual.
Has anyone ever, Craig, ever breached when you actually type your password in, right? There's something there that's intelligently receiving that input and deciding if it matches the correct password. You know what I mean? Am I explaining that right? Something there is comparing what you input to what is the known password. Has anyone ever successfully breached that, like that right there, that whatever you want to call it?
I think you're referring to the hashing database.
Okay, yeah, that's probably what I'm referring to.
Yeah. We've definitely breached it several times when we do pen tests, for sure.
So that's not something you really hear very much about, because you hear about people trying to break passwords by using algorithms to crack them. And then you hear about advanced algorithms that listen for keystrokes on a keyboard to determine what's being typed. But that's something you don't really hear about. But you witness that in pen tests that can be breached. So that's, I wonder if we'll hear more about that. Like what's if we breached it in pen test, what's the missing link there?
Yeah. So the very first pen test I ever did ages ago was breaching the password database on a Unix system. And what happened was they did not restrict who can look at that database. So I was able to download it in the pen test exercise and then run some software that would crack the encryption. And at that time, now I'm dating myself now, but at that time it was a 386 x86 microprocessor, and it took about a week to crack the passwords. But when it was done, I had about 1,500 user accounts and passwords.
Oh my God.
Wow.
So nowadays, fast forward to most companies use Microsoft Windows Server as their operating system. There's what's called SMB, and there's obviously with the later versions of Windows Server, it's more secure and encrypted by default. But in older versions, it was not, and you could still run software against it. And even, default settings may not be enough. But the point is that you could still capture that password database and then run tools against it to crack everyone's password. What you were talking about a minute ago was called brute force. So a lot of hackers will try combinations and use software and scripts to try combinations of what they'll do is they'll look at past breaches and they'll load up a database of all these different username password combinations, and they'll start with that database, and then they'll use what's called a dictionary file, and then they'll set up a brute force attack. So there's different ways to obviously mitigate those risks, but yeah, those are the two most common practices.
Wow, that's like when you start digging into it like that, it's like it really puts a new, like you were talking at the beginning about looking at things through a different lens. And it really makes you do that when you start hearing these details, because everyone hears password security, but when you hear it broken down like that in all the different ways that passwords can be breached, then it takes on a whole new meaning. It's, oh, wow, this actually really is something to really take seriously, because that's a lot of that's a lot of entry points.
Look at what happened with Equifax, right? When the hack of Equifax, had Equifax been encrypting, then the database that was captured and stolen would have been scrambled. But they didn't use that layer for whatever reason. And that's why
they weren't encrypting the passwords that were stored.
They weren't encrypting the data that was able to be exfiltrated out. I don't know if they were encrypting the passwords by default, but I know that the payload was not encrypted. Had they been using more encryption layers, then the payload would have been scrambled and the hackers wouldn't have been able to breach.
Oh, wow. So when you said, when I was asking about the whatever it is that measures or compares the data input for the password to what's stored, you called it what did you call it? A hash what?
Hashing.
Okay, so
hash
is
database.
So is that kind of like the same concept of the hash algorithms that, that, for example, that cryptocurrency operates on the foundation of? Is that kind of the same concept?
Similar concept. Obviously, crypto's on a blockchain, so it's different. But yeah, there's hashes, or how I describe it, it's a mechanism or a methodology around. So when you type in password for your password, it's then translated by the operating system to a hash string, which is similar to a GUID, usually very long character, multi-character thing. And then typically it's encrypted. So then the tools would then decrypt that database and then be able to reverse the hash back to what is the English password.
So the hash is one thing, and then encryption is another thing on top of the hash.
Yeah, that's different. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
And then there's what's called salting, and salting is another type of security technology that is in addition to the hashing layer that makes things a little bit more secure.
And that's the same, related to the same concept about security.
Yeah, it's just another layer of security.
Wow.
Yeah, so this
I hear the hashing, and I think of a new movie by M. Night Shyamalan. Hashing. I'm like,
yeah, it's interesting when you that term hash. It's just interesting because it's like there's the air of mystery around it. What is it, and what is it doing actually? Like, what functions is it performing, and how? And when it does this, is it getting smarter each time? Is there a degree of machine learning that takes place with creating each hash? Looking at it from that lens, like that's probably a lens we don't usually look at it through. But when you look at it through that lens, if you were the algorithm doing the hashing, are you getting sharper and smarter with each hash?
No, it's a fixed programming in the operating system, so it's not going to get smarter. It's just going to do it one way, and it's not going to get any smarter, and that's a whole different technology.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah, so there is what's called SMB signing, and then there's different versions of SMB signing that would help better protect that hash database. But anyway, as new versions of Microsoft, for example, as new versions of Microsoft Server came out, security was elevated in each version of their server, at least. So obviously the latest version of server is more secure by default than like a 2003 server.
Have you noticed lately, I've been really noticing a lot of the big tech companies and others as well, but I've really been noticing what big tech companies, they're really talking about security a lot lately. Like security, like even on my AT&T home network, the fiber optic network, they now have something called AT&T Active Security or something like that. And you're hearing a lot more about this. Microsoft's talking about it. And I'm hearing a lot more about security layers within big tech.
Yeah, it's probably because of the elevated threat landscape that we're living in right now, right? So the providers are trying to do what they can to protect their consumers. Just yesterday, I think you saw the post that I posted about ASUS routers being vulnerable, big flaw there. So obviously you need to patch the firmware of your router. And it goes back to what's called your asset inventory. As a consumer, and especially as a business, you should know what's on your network at all times. You should have mechanisms in place to make sure that devices can't be added to your network without your knowledge. You should be maintaining all those devices on the network. And obviously router, firewall, access points, wireless, Wi-Fi, IoT devices, all that stuff. The more stuff you buy, DJ, the more stuff you add to that network, the more the more work you got to do. And then before you know it, you're going to have all this stuff and you're not going to have any time to do anything else. So you're going to need to outsource it. So BJ, you're going to have to train a bot.
I have PPG managed services on my network.
Those managed services are limited to 10 devices, and then we're going to have to start charging you money.
I feel like we need to write a system security plan for BJ.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, really.
Policies and procedures going.
Yeah.
Back to Equifax, like BJ, they got social security numbers from these people. So if there's anybody out there listening and you store social security numbers of your customers, that is a high sensitivity data point. And for example, if you're an accountant or if you have a medical practice, doctor, chiropractor, dentist, or whatever, make sure that you are encrypting your data. And if you don't know what you're doing, just reach out to
and it's not that's a really good point. Like, you can't also assume that your medical software provider or your IT guy is doing that job, because those are different jobs and the responsibility is yours as the business owner to make sure that you have the supporting evidence and the proof that stuff is secure, because there's data breach laws in almost all of the states. There's federal laws, there's FTC regulations. So depending on the type of business you have, and you might say, oh, I'm a business owner, maybe I'm a plumber, or I don't collect data on people. You actually are collecting data. If you're selling to a consumer, you're collecting oftentimes name, address, phone number, email address. Right. Yeah. Yes. Now you probably want to take money from that customer for the services that you provide. So you're probably taking a credit card. Now you're subject to PCI compliance mandates. And you might have said, or you might be thinking, well, I use Square or I use QuickBooks or something like that. Again, it's still the business owner's responsibility to ensure that proper safeguards are in place. And oftentimes, if you're a low volume business where you don't do thousands of transactions a day, you could do what's called a self-assessment and self-attestation. But when you go through that, it's typically 59 questions for a small business. When you go through it, they tell you, look, can't be storing credit card numbers in an insecure system. You can't be writing them down on a piece of paper. You have responsibilities to keep this information secure. And if you don't, you're in hot water for fines, and the fines are steep.
Yeah, some businesses, unfortunately, because and in their defense, it's understandable because they're not IT or cyber businesses. They do other things, and it's like a wave, right? Like, we caught the wave in the beginning. We all got online with AOL and whatever dial-up service, and we all started chatting online when it was brand new. And then sometime between then and now, things gained momentum, and there was regulation put in place, and probably there's a lot of businesses that aren't even aware of their responsibilities in regards to IT infrastructure and cybersecurity and data breach reporting. I would say there's probably a large number of businesses that just completely are in the dark about their responsibilities there. But it happened, even if we weren't paying attention to the regulation as things progressed, it's there now. And there's breach reporting laws and things like that. And it's an education matter now, right? Like, people starting to understand what the responsibilities are. And I think, like we talked before about the gap, like, we have experts like you, Craig, on one end of the spectrum that can just spout off all this technical stuff within your brain. And then we have the other end of the spectrum that people who maybe don't even really understand how computing works and how a network works and all that. And that gap there has created a lot of uncertainty, maybe. And so now, as people start to understand that the severity of risk in regards to cyberspace, now it's an education matter. Like, now we have to all come together and learn, what is this that we're using and have become so reliant on? And then how do we use it responsibly? And then how do we protect ourselves and our clients?
Yeah.
A lot of people.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, a lot of people too, like, for example, like Craig said, they sign up for these third-party services, Square, whatever payment processor, whatever website. A lot of, especially medical practices, they use a lot of like customer patient like software. And a lot of times when these people sign up for them, they're like, oh, I don't have any data here. I'm using this patient portal or this or that. It was in the cloud. And they're promised they're secure. And a lot of times, if you go back and read the terms of service, they are absolving themselves of legal liability. So if your patients are stored within their database and somehow they get hacked, you get hacked, vice versa, your client list leaks out social security numbers, you are responsible for that loss of data. And then depending on your service industry, there's also like a window of opportunity from the time that the breach occurred to like the time that you have to notify your customers. And if you don't follow those two things, like you could be in hot water. So if you're serving customers at all, the biggest thing you can do is go back and look at your service agreements, look at your contracts, look at the terms of service for the applications of third-party softwares that you've signed up for, and see where the liability falls. Really, that's the biggest thing that you can do for yourself right now.
What comes to mind too, Blake, is a lot of people will tell me, oh, we use Google. We're a chiropractor, or we're a small medical office. We use Google. If you look at Google's terms and conditions, like you said, a lot of these companies, Google, Microsoft, Amazon, they all hold themselves harmless of any kind of security. So the security is on the consumer. They provide you with the platform, but it's your responsibility as the user or business owner to secure that platform properly. And if you're not knowledgeable about the cybersecurity, you need to hire a company that is, because one wrong move, one wrong change of a setting can cause a breach for you. And it's very rare nowadays, especially if you take a credit card or you're meeting with a consumer. It's very rare nowadays that you're not subject to, it's almost assumed nowadays that you are regulated, because there's all these regulations for any kind of business. Like I said, FTC regulations, there's ADA compliance now for people with disabilities. You got to make sure that your website is properly able to be read by what's called a screen reader. And we have a free assessment around that now, where you can just reach out to us and it takes us just a few seconds just to show you at no cost. Look, you have a website. If you're in business, you most likely are not an ADA expert, but we can show you in seconds that, look, here are some problems with your website and how you can get a steep fine, a nasty fine as a business owner. And I would argue, if you're in business nowadays, there's probably a very strong probability that you are regulated in some way, shape, or form.
That is a perfect example, Craig, of the culmination of all of this, because there's all these different industries and they have different regulations, PCI, GAP, whatever, for credit card processing industry. You have CMMC for cybersecurity and maturity model for the Department of Defense. You have all kinds of different areas, HIPAA for medical. But then you have this ADA, and that is one that is a unifying regulation. Because if you have an online presence in a business capacity, no matter how small it is, technically you are required to be ADA compliant. And that applies to everyone. That could be if you're selling t-shirts online out of your pickup truck. It doesn't matter. If you have an online presence, you are subject to ADA, and there is literally a pathway there for if someone sees your website and feels that it's not ADA compliant, if they there's contact information online for this, you contact and you report the business as not being ADA compliant, and then the business is sued by the federal government, and then the person who blew the whistle on that business gets a portion of the reward from the fine. And so this isn't very real. This is not something coming in the future. This is already there. And there have already been lots of lawsuits and lots of payouts to whistleblowers. And so this applies to everyone. Like everyone has to be compliant for ADA. So that's a really good point to point out. This is really an umbrella now. Like it's everyone who's online has responsibilities.
Not only ADA, but not only ADA, but two big ones are CCPA. So if you have customers in California, you got to pay attention to that. If you have customers in the European Union, they got GDPR.
Yeah.
Those are two that everybody has to comply with.
New York has its own version of that California privacy.
And the beauty of it is, as much as this may sound like bad news on the front end, right? If I have an online business and I'm not compliant with any of this right now, and I'm not even aware of any of it, I'm going to hear all this and I'm going to be like, oh my gosh, I just want to stop doing business. This sounds bad. But the good news is that there's a lot of overlap with all of this. Like all these different types of regulation and compliance, they're called different things and they're written up different ways, but it all boils down to the same general good practices for cyber hygiene. And so once you get your stuff flossing your teeth, like you do that from a business perspective, you practice good cyber hygiene. Once you get it down. Once you're there, you're really going to be okay with all these different regulations because they all are redundant. They all point to the same good.
Well, to be clear, it's sometimes there's, I think what you mean, BJ, is there's parallels. So for example, if you're a medical clinic, you're most likely subject to what's called NIST 66 is the framework of maturity model to follow. But if you're like a DoD contractor or a defense industrial based contractor, your requirements are higher, they're heightened. So that would be NIST 800, 171 or 172, and then whenever CMMC signs into law. So there's different levels of process. Like the HIPAA might have maybe 50 controls and DoD might have 110 controls, but the 50 on the HIPAA NIST 66 versus the DoD NIST 800, 171, there's overlap there. So some of we're not saying that every company needs to do the maximum. Obviously, that would be good for any company to follow the same regulations as a DIB contractor, but maybe that's not cost effective, but there are ways to get that cost down. The point is that as a business owner, you have obligations and there's different regulations, and you can satisfy by doing some of the security controls, you can satisfy multiple regulations. And that's the point.
Yeah. Yeah. That's exactly the clarity that's what I meant. And when we see a common misconception, right? We see this a lot within HIPAA, within the medical practices, and we see it probably, I would venture to say even more, which is unfortunate. We see it even more amongst the defense industrial based contractors. They have a common misconception that if they're small, that these things don't really matter because they're so small. We hear that a lot. Well, I'm such a small contractor. I only have this many devices on my network. So the CMMC is really not that important for me. That's very untrue because it doesn't matter if you're small, you are a possible attack vector and
That's
you
right.
are a possible launching pad, and you could be a gaping hole that could cause a ship to sink. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
it doesn't matter that your network is small. You are an access point
But there's
to a full defense industrial base.
That's right. And there's like a, what I call foundational level of security, whether you're one person working out of your house, or if you've got 100 people or 1,000 people in your company, there's still a threshold and foundational level of security that if you're dealing with just one document that has sensitive information, controlled unclassified information, or you have patient health information and you're a small chiropractor and it's just you and an assistant, you're still subject to the same HIPAA compliance as a hospital. Yeah, you might not be as big and as complicated as that hospital, but you both take insurance, most likely, and you both are handling patient health information. So you're treated the same way. HIPAA compliance for you is going to be oftentimes less expensive than that hospital, but you still have to have that minimum foundational compliance layer, and you have to show all the supporting evidence to make sure that you're compliant.
Yes.
I wanted to bring up something too. So my boyfriend he's a surveyor, and he worked for this one company. I won't say any names, obviously, but he worked for this one company. I know they have government contracts, and he showed me around the office one day, and there was just maps of the city just sitting out, and I was like, oh my God, they would be in so much trouble if they did this because, if I was a bad actor of some sort, I could go in there and use those maps or take pictures or whatever and use that to hurt people of some way, so it's a small company. They just do surveying. So you think oh, what's the big deal? If you have a government contract in the wrong hands, this information that you have would be really
And it's very valuable to the adversary too. So even if you're just that one person and you're dealing with a purchase order of widgets of a missile part or whatever, and you're that one metal manufacturer or whatever you're doing in your small business and your contribution, doesn't matter how small you are, you still have that obligation to protect that sensitive information because it's so valuable to the adversary.
Not only that too, but if you're a reseller, let's just say you're buying proprietary parts from a defense contractor or whoever, and you're not even doing anything, you're just reselling those parts, you still have to follow the same regulations as the person that's supplying those parts to you.
Yeah. So if you're what's called a sub to the prime, you have what's called the trickle down effect. So the whole flow of CUI from that big provider down to your small company, you have to keep all of it secure.
So it's even further, be subcontractor, and then you have vendors of the subcontractors.
That's right. And then all of any third parties or anybody involved, like in the medical world, you've got what's called the covered entity which is typically the doctor's office or the hospital. And then you've got, oftentimes if you take insurance, you've got what's called a clearinghouse. And then let's say you've got an IT provider, that's what's called a business associate. So all of those, all are subject to HIPAA compliance.
Yeah.
But yeah, all the vendors, all the solutions, any kind of software or equipment, firewalls, all that stuff has to be compliant. And if you don't have the evidence for it, you'll fail the audit. And that's where you'll get in trouble.
Not only will you fail it, but also I have a feeling we're about to see some big attacks or attack attempts. So it's unsafe for the national security just in general. And that's what I was wondering about, Craig, when I was reading the article that you had sent about, the Biden's warning. It could be something where they go after like small, I don't know. I see it like the adversary is like laying dormant almost until.
Well, that's right, Erin. Remember that term, right? We hear it from one of our partners in regards to the AI-driven cybersecurity software that extended detection and response, that term dwell time. So we've known about a lot of breaches recently that were very big and very widespread, and then they went silent. And does that mean that they're no longer a threat? Absolutely not. Now we're in the dwell time phase. So now we don't know what's going on in the background. So like you've had SolarWinds, and then you had Log4. I always get it mixed up. Is it Log4j or Log4Shell? The one that was
well, it's both. Yeah, both.
Okay, so then you have those two main ones that were huge recently, and they're seem dormant right now. But obviously, if you just think it through, because they say, I read an article last week that the Log4j, just that one alone, there's every hour millions of breach attempts happening to exploit that vulnerability. Now, when you do the math with that and you look at how many businesses are affected by that Log4j vulnerability, and then you factor in the mathematics of millions of breach attempts happening per hour, and then how many of those are successful, a lot of probability is going to mean that some of those are successful. And then with those successful ones, we know that there's something like 80% lateral movement from a breach. So when one of these breaches is successful, then there's going to be an 80% likelihood of a lateral movement. And so we're in that holding pattern right now where we have no idea what the situation truly is because we're in the dwell time phase right now.
Well, not only are we in that dwell time phase, but you have to assume that we're all Swiss cheese. We've all got all these vulnerabilities, especially businesses. Most businesses, let's face the facts, they don't have the technology to stop this stuff. They've got more holes than they can fill. And they need help. And adversaries are exploiting that. It's so easy for them to write a script and find the low-hanging fruit. They literally push a button to scan, and then it goes back to them to report, okay, here's our low-hanging fruit. Here's the easiest ways in. And then they push another button to drop the ransomware. And it's in less than an hour, they just got a payday of millions of dollars because of all these businesses that are Swiss cheese.
Yes, they do. They push that little button, they run their automated software, and then it's the Wild West. They swing their right hip and they move this lateral and then it's just, mathematically, it's astounding to think of the possibilities. The potential is literally like, just again, to bring it back to your first statement, Craig, when you talked about looking at it through a different lens. Like, I guess a way I kind of frame this in my mind, the current state of cybersecurity, if we were to picture the internet or the cyberspace as an entity, just picture it that way. And picture it getting up and walking right now. We've got like a zombie with rabies and everything else walking, right? On this framework that's got tons of holes in it. And it's just a mess. It's a monster. It's on epic proportions. So we all need to do our part to get this thing in order so that we have something that's a more pleasant picture than the current monster.
And
go ahead, Craig.
I was just going to say, here's the other side too. There's new laws that are being pushed through every day that a lot of people may not be aware of. But there's what's called breach reporting laws, and those breach reporting rules and laws, they vary from state to state. But there was another thing that Biden signed, I think it was just a few weeks ago, shortly after the war started, where he said that if you're a government entity, there are a couple things that they did. If you're a government entity, now you have a shorter time window to report that breach. Because just think about it from before, when they didn't have that law in place, businesses didn't know, number one, if they were breached because they didn't have the right technology in the lens. But number two, when they finally discover it, now they only have a certain period of time, and it's the timer starts ticking to report it. The other thing that they introduced to local government was they introduced a cyber team that it's like a response team for cyber. This is brand new too. If you're a local government entity, you have access now to an incident response cyber team to help you with it. When a breach does happen, they'll do the forensics and the detail there.
But if you, like you were talking about, if you don't have the right technology and lens on your network, you don't know about a breach, and you're not necessarily held harmless from that. If you're breached and you don't know it because you don't have the proper eyes on your network, you're not absolved of any ramifications there.
That's right.
You have a responsibility to know when you're breached. And so that's a factor as well.
It's kind of, I think about it as like taxes. If you failed to pay your taxes and then you get audited and then they discover, oh, you failed to pay this. Now you have penalties and interest. It's the same thing in the cyber world. If they do the forensic investigation and they find out, oh, this breach happened 2 years ago, you're going to have penalties and interest for not reporting that. You know what I mean? So you best be in touch with a good cyber attorney to help you. And I'm not saying this stuff to scare people. I'm just saying this is the reality of the world that we live in.
The reality, and the solution always goes back to using, like, humans, they throughout history have always been as good as their tools, right? Like throughout history, you look at the Iron Age and all these, it's always what tools are available to humans and how do they use those tools to their maximum potential. And right now, tools like extended detection and response, because from a breach reporting perspective, that's how when your network is breached, because you have AI eyes on your network and it knows when something happens and it tells you, hey, there's something happening here. And so then you're protecting yourself from liability there because you're knowing when you get breached, and those tools are available. So not using them is not a good defense to not knowing that you were breached, because those tools are available to all at a very low entry point, price wise.
Yeah, and it's definitely a very effective layer. It's not the cure-all. You still need training and all these other things, but the more supporting evidence that you can furnish, the higher likelihood of a payout. If you do get a breach from, cyber insurance, if you don't have cyber insurance, it'll allow you to qualify to get cyber insurance. Quite frankly, the more layers you have in place, you're not going to have a breach in the first place.
Yeah, and if anything, from just protecting your business standpoint, it shows due diligence. It shows that, because that was the thing with with HIPAA, there's that due diligence. Like, it shows, did you try? And so not doing anything in regards to your cybersecurity is definitely not showing a due diligence.
Yeah, like with HIPAA, that law was enacted by Bill Clinton in 1996. That's old. It's so vague, the HIPAA law, it doesn't even talk about the requirement of encryption. However, nowadays, encryption is so easy to do. I think it would be really hard to argue in an audit that you chose to not leverage encryption at different layers in your system security plan, and in favor of how inexpensive, often free, it is to implement. I think it would be really hard to argue your point as a medical practice.
It would just be wise for anyone doing business online to try to do a self-assessment right now of themselves, or just say, look, if I was breached and were asked all these questions, what tools were you using to prevent a breach? Did you use encryption? Ask yourself those questions now before someone else asks you those questions, and apply just a degree of wisdom in those questions. If you ask yourself, it is a no-brainer that you should take some kind of action.
The biggest action people could take is just to call us. They could take advantage of the free phone call. They can get in touch with us. We could ask them some questions over the phone, instantly grade their maturity level. And if they're ready to do something about it, we have options for that. If they're not and they just want information, that's okay too. But the point is to take that first step forward, right? Like, at least try to chip away at this stuff. It's not realistic that it's going to, we don't have the magic pill. We're not going to say, look, do this one thing and then you're all secure. It doesn't work like that, but it is a continuous effort.
Yeah, it sure is.
I wanted to say too, this is a good segue, but a lot of people, whenever they reach out to us and we start pointing out like what they should be doing and what they are doing, we're not here to turn you in. Like, we're not going to turn around and say, oh, John Smith from da-da-da-da is doing this incorrectly. It seems like a lot of people start defending themselves, and they're scared to admit whenever we, have a new dialogue with a customer, they're scared to admit what they're doing wrong.
Yeah.
And it's not really about that, because the quicker you are to admit it and the more honest you are with us, the easier to. Or if you come in for an assessment and you're saying that you're doing this, or you're not quite sure, or you say you are and you aren't, and we expect that, and then we find out that you aren't, we're not going to penalize you, obviously, but it adds more work to us. And if we have to go back and do the work again independently, and it hurts you more than it hurts us, because we can accurately, give you a more accurate timeline if you were more transparent, or a more accurate cost to remediate your business. So don't be scared to approach a cybersecurity firm if it's us, and tell them what you're fearful of, or what you're doing wrong, because
there's probably a lot of people, we see that with the DoD contractors, that because of the fact that it was written in their contracts years ago that they were supposed to be NIST 800, 171 compliant, and they've been saying that they are to get these contracts, but they know that they're not. And now they don't want, there's an uncomfortable transition now to go from self-attestation of being compliant to now actually enlisting help of professionals to get compliant, even though you were attesting to that compliance. But know this, because there's a degree of fear there that's causing a blockage for people. But know this, you're not alone, because we have been seeing this as this is very consistent. This is why CMMC came about, because this is such a widespread issue. You're not alone. Like everyone, most contractors are in the same boat as you. Everyone that called us, they're in the same mess. You're not alone. You haven't been the only one attesting to compliance and not taking it seriously. This is a widespread problem. It's affecting most American businesses. It is a matter of national security now. So there's no reason to feel fear or guilt or shame. Know that we've all been guilty of this. And now it's just a matter of fixing it. And there's no judgment involved, because we know how widespread the problem is. It's pretty much throughout the whole defense industrial base, and then it spreads from there to the whole nation. It's not just your business. It's a national problem.
I don't remember what portion it was, but the number of companies that were compliant is like 1%.
Like nothing.
Yeah.
When they did their audits about because they were trusting that, but that's just human nature. It's not something to feel guilt or fear or shame over. It's just human nature. We prioritize what we feel is most important, and then we focus on those things, and we back burner everything else. And unfortunately, for the last several years, cybersecurity was on the back burner. And that's how we all did business, with cybersecurity on the back burner. And so now it's shifting, and it's okay to know that you're part of that culture that had it on the back burner. Everyone mostly was, but now it's just Lockheed Martin. Like that, the whole reason that China had a certain fighter jet was because of a breach at Lockheed Martin. It's a communal problem. We all understand, because we've all had it on the back burner.
Everybody.
If you think about it, if only 1% or maybe even 0%, I don't know, of people of these businesses are compliant, clearly there's something wrong with the policies. Right? You can't have that many people unable to get compliant with NIST, or struggling to get compliant, and think, no, it's all your fault. You know what I mean?
I think a lot of people don't know where to start. I think they're confused. Right. They don't know where to start. And
like, that's the point of CMMC, is to try to make it easier, but it was still really complicated.
I think when it was published in 1.0, I think it created more confusion than anything. And I think that it's been cleared up a little bit, but there's still a lot of misinformation out there. But the point is that that's what we do. We do this every day. We work hard to vet and test different solutions. We have the most efficient, cost-effective path and we're always working to improve that. And it's not millions of dollars for the little guy. We can come up with some affordable solutions that will vastly improve the security and move your SPURS score up the ladder. You got to go from a negative. Most people are negative in the defense industrial base, and that's okay. We understand that. But we've come up with a very efficient, cost-effective way to move them from that negative score in a short period of time to a positive score, and then keep honing that, and then eventually getting them to that perfect 110.
And
we have the path.
Not a magic pill. We found a strategy that is identifying a very strategic point in the CMMC, and then applying the smart tools to that strategy, and it makes for a quick pivot into the positives. Like we've taken clients from the negative, negative 100 or whatever it is,
negative
to
203,
positive 60 fairly quickly, by just utilizing one simple strategy and then applying smart tools and then making that pivot.
Yep. And we do as much of the work as we can. We probably do 80% of the work for the company. And we put ourselves through all the rigorous exams and certifications really for our clients. The knowledge and expertise that we've gained for CMMC, it helps us help the small business. It helps us help the medical clinic that's subject to HIPAA compliance. So that stuff we know is like the back of our hand now. And we've already found the efficiencies and more cost-effective ways to make them compliant too. We talk a lot about CMMC and DIB companies and things like that. And some companies that are listening or people that are listening are like, that's not me. I'm not. That's okay. But the point is that it's a proven methodology for those folks. And we have a path forward that's cost-effective that we're going to get you from that negative score or that mark, so to speak, the easy hack to a much more hardened company that hackers will move on to an easier target.
Yep. The more businesses that become
on the brain too. I think sorry, BJ. I think that's another important thing to think of too, is like, you know, a lot of the people that we work with as well, we keep compliance in the back of our head. Like we are trying to simplify it for everyone as much as possible. We do the mapping, right? So if we end a certain solution, we can help you map it back to the security controls as opposed to doing it yourself. And you're like, I have no idea what this covers. I think that's another important service that we offer.
And another thing too, a lot of IT folks, we're not looking to take the IT guy's job. If you've got a relationship with your IT guy, your IT company, keep that relationship. Let them do that work. But we're here to be their cybersecurity and compliance arm to work with that provider. If you're an IT provider listening, we have solutions to help bolt on our cyber and compliance team to your services. We're not going to steal your clients. We're just here to help the client in the end, help them become more secure. That's what we're about.
Yeah, a lot of the companies we work with, of course, they're IT and we work hand in hand with them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because technically, especially with CMMC, there does need to be a separation of IT and cybersecurity. So technically, if you are regulated by CMMC, you can't have your IT team doing your cybersecurity. There has to be a separation between IT and cybersecurity.
That's right. Awesome, guys. You want to wrap it up here?
Yep. Talking about what we love, and then we always go over our time, but it's because this stuff is so relevant. It's so relevant. It's so critical right now. My gosh, does everyone realize, just steal the viewpoint out for a moment, does everyone realize that we're in a cyber war after just having two majorly huge exploits out there with Log4j and SolarWinds? And that's a horrible time for a cyber war, guys.
Pipeline, like they, according to the hackers with Colonial Pipeline, they weren't even trying to mess us up. They said maybe they were, but you know, like it wasn't their goal. So if you look at something like that, wasn't even their goal. They do want to wreak havoc.
Yeah, it's not time. It's not time to be fearful, because fear doesn't help anyone. But it's time to pay attention.
Cautious.
To be aware of this and to just take decisive action. To say, I'm going to stop being part of the problem and try to be part of the solution. Because the more of us that get secure, the less pivot points there are, the less threat vectors there are and attack surfaces. So we're all one moving organism, right? So the more we do our part, the safer we all are.
There's two. I want to say there's two parts of a cyber attack. There's the physical, right? Like entering your system, collecting your data, breaching your network, yada. And then there's the psychological side of every attack.
And then you have the reputation management too.
Yeah. A lot of attackers, for example, get a lot of calls about people that are like, oh, my Facebook's been hacked and I'm getting these messages and these text messages about them releasing this and releasing or sending messages, like Erin said, messages to her friends and yada. That's the psychological side of the attack. A lot of hackers will utilize that to make their prey or their target feel weaker and to lower them and create a larger advantage between the data that they're collecting and what they really have. So that's another side. And the reason why I was saying that is you need to frame your mind for both sides. It helps a lot to step into doing the security things that we're talking about, but you need to frame your mind and stop thinking that this can't happen to you.
Assume that it has.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's the reality of it. It's most likely it is, and it has happened to you, or it's continuously happening to you.
It's only on the increase. Unfortunately, as the rise of automated tools help us to manage cybersecurity much better, on the flip side, you have automated malware tools, and that makes the risk so much more widespread and such a faster spread that it's really illogical to think that this can't and won't happen to you due to automated malware tools. The reach is far and wide.
That's
It's
right.
already happened. Craig said, if you have used Equifax, TransUnion, Erin, whatever, your social security number is probably on the dark web already, or your password is already on the dark web, or your Gmail account, or it probably has already happened. You just haven't found out about it yet. And that's the truth. And that's the reason why we're here and we're doing these types of things for awareness. But frame your mind. Like, you need to be prepared to take on both sides.
It's just time to go on the offensive. It's time to go on the offensive as a nation with our cybersecurity and stop just being sitting ducks.
All right, guys, let's wrap up for the day.
All right.
Another good session. Thank you, guys.
All right.
Have a good rest of your
later.
day. All right, bye.
Bye.
Yes, thank you everybody for coming. And please join us tomorrow at noon for our live broadcast on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube Live, or LinkedIn. If you're not able to join us live, we will be posting our podcast pretty much wherever podcasts are posted. So check us out. Thanks a lot. Please like and subscribe, and we'll talk to you tomorrow.
Thanks for listening to the Cybersecurity and Compliance Podcast with Craig Petronella. For other episodes and more information, visit PetronellaTech.com. Also visit our other websites, ComplianceArmor.com and BlockchainSecurity.com. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks for listening, and stay secure.